Antiochus IV was this really nasty fella, called himself God manifest. The Jews just said he's a madman. They made a play on words in the Greek. Eventually the situation gets to be such that they do raise a rebellion. It is led by a family who collectively are known as the Maccabees. It's actually the second of the family that gets that nickname, but it just gets applied to everybody. They succeed in getting rid of their Seleucid overlords. First, they end up being a tributary kingdom, if you will, in the Seleucid Empire. Eventually, then they get total and complete freedom. They don't have to pay taxes to the Seleucid Empire anymore. At that point in time, what ends up happening when they establish a dynasty is instead of being called the Maccabees, they end up being called the Hasmoneans. So that's why we call it differently. We go from the Maccabees to the Hasmoneans, but these are the same people, okay? These are the same people. It's just once they found a dynasty, then they get called something new. That's just kind of a quirk of history. I don't know why that is. It just is. So that name Hasmonean, somebody was asking me before class how you pronounce that. I said I pronounce it Hasmonean. Whether that's right or not, that's how I'm saying it. So that's what I'm going with at any rate. If you find it pronounced somewhere else, or you just like saying it some other different way, you go right ahead. That's not going to bother me at all. But I'm going to say Hasmonean. This particular name is probably derived from an ancestor of Mattathias' family. Mattathias being who? The first of the Maccabees, if you will. He's the one that leads the rebellion in the village of Modane, or in the town of Modane. So the name Hasmonean is probably derived from this ancestor whose name was Hashmon, which in Greek would have been Asmoneus. Okay, and so somehow or another that gets brought over into English as Hasmonean. This again refers to the dynasty established when the Seleucid kingdom recognized the independence of the Jewish state. Simon, and with him a hereditary high priesthood, were recognized, quote, until a trustworthy prophet should arise, end quote. That is a quote from 1 Maccabees chapter 14, verse 41. Remember, there are 4 books of Maccabees, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. 3rd and 4th aren't really worth a whole lot from a historical standpoint. 1st and 2nd are actually very worthwhile from a historical standpoint. So that's what Jews were thinking at the time, okay? Simon would be part of this hereditary high priesthood, and they're recognized until God would say otherwise, okay? Until there would be a trustworthy prophet that presumably, if it's a trustworthy prophet, God is speaking through them. And so if God then changes things, then that's okay. But barring that, not having that, what are we going to do? We're just going to assume that this is going to be good with everybody. And so that's what we're going to do with this hereditary high priesthood. You can read if you want to. We will not forsake of time this evening, but you can read if you want to. 1 Maccabees chapter 14, verses 25 through 49. It's a lengthy reading. You don't have it in your papers. This is not one I chose to share with you all. However, it's readily available online. All you have to do is go to your Google search engine, your Yahoo, whatever you use, type in 1 Maccabees 14, and you will get some free versions of that that'll pop up, and you can read that if you want to. That verse 41, of course, comes out of that section where it's talking about what's happening with the Hasmoneans. All right, so John Hyrcanus I is the fellow that we need to talk about next from the Hasmonean dynasty. Remember, these are all the Maccabees, okay? But now they've got a Jewish state. Now they have a dynastic name. John Hyrcanus I. In 134 BC, Simon and 2 of his sons are murdered by his son-in-law, Ptolemy. Now, we see the name Ptolemy, and we always want to reference what? Egypt. Don't, okay? This Ptolemy has nothing to do with the dynasty in Egypt, all right? He just has that name. So Simon, 2 of his sons, murdered by his son-in-law Ptolemy. That means Ptolemy was married to who? One of Simon's daughters, okay? John Hyrcanus, then, who is another one of Simon's sons, becomes high priest. Because of that, then Ptolemy is forced to flee, okay? In 134 BC as well, Antiochus the seventh now, remember the rebellion starts under Antiochus the fourth. Now we have Antiochus the seventh. He invades Judea and besieges the city of Jerusalem. Hyrcanus is high priest, okay? And he's effectively leading what's going on in Judea. As a result of this invasion, there is a resolution that is made between these two parties. Antiochus VII would be from what empire? The Seleucids, okay? If I ever ask you Ptolemy was from what empire, you will always know to say what? Egypt, as long as I'm talking about a ruler, not the son-in-law, okay? So Antiochus is from the Seleucid Empire. They invade. An agreement is reached during a 7-day truce, okay? As a result of that agreement, Jerusalem's walls are destroyed. Some non-Judean cities are surrendered. Surrendered to who? To the Seleucids, okay? So the Hasmoneans lose part of their territory, but not in Judea. Judea is the heartland of their territory. They don't lose cities there. These cities are elsewhere. Also, the Hasmonean state is required to pay an indemnity. What is an indemnity? What is that?
A fine or a tax.
A fine or a tax. Someone else over here? It's reparations, okay? You know, you started this war, we won this war, therefore you are going to pay us something to compensate us for this war. The last time that I can recall as a nation we did that was at the end of World War I, when the Allies made the Germans pay for this nasty war that they supposedly started, which was not true historically. I mean, it was everybody starting the war, and that laid the foundation work for this little fella in Austria to take control of Germany about 20 years later and really set the world on fire. But you see indemnities being paid, and that would have been Hitler, for those of you that didn't catch that. These indemnities are paid sometimes when one country defeats another. We want some of your money, you're going to pay some money. We don't really have time to conquer you entirely, so we'll just take some of your money and we'll be happy, we'll go home. Events in Syria under John Hyrcanus I, events in Syria reach a point that Judea is able to reassert its independence. Okay, the Seleucids are not very strong right now, and so it doesn't take a whole lot for things to end up in such a way that the Hasmoneans can once again become independent. They're able to do that while John Hyrcanus is on the scene. An embassy then is sent to Rome, and the Senate of Rome confirms Judea's independence and warns the Seleucids to stay out. That's pretty significant. We haven't talked about the rise of Rome yet. That's going to be a few classes down the road. But what we should note, even though we haven't talked about it, is that Rome is on the rise. Okay, Rome is now a power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, remember Antiochus IV goes down to Egypt, and when he's down in Egypt, he thinks he's going to take over Egypt. And the Romans have an ambassador down there, not an army, an ambassador. And the ambassador tells Antiochus IV that if you do this, you're going to be making war against Rome. And, you know, the circle in the sand around him, because Antiochus says, well, I need some time to think about it, or I'll think about it. And the ambassador, again, who has no army with him in Egypt, says, will you think about it before you come out of that circle? And Antiochus IV said, okay, I'm going home, and left the circle and went home. So Rome is already very, very strong, and all the Seleucid Empire knows that. So when the Senate of Rome confirms Judea as an independent kingdom, the Seleucids are going to have to respect that to some degree or another. Now, why does Rome care about an independent kingdom in Judea? And if you're going to answer that, we're going to give Thomas steps tonight, because he was watching football all afternoon, watching Texas win, so he needs to get some steps in, right? So if you know the answer to that question, why would Rome care at all about what's happening in Judea? Or why might you think Rome might care about what's happening in Judea? Raise your hand. Don't make me give you the answer. Somebody raise your hand. Aaron, you know you want to answer this question.
Maybe because it's a route between Egypt, and Egypt is the breadbasket, and so they don't want anything to interfere with their grain supplies going to Rome. I don't know if that is anything. Okay,
it might have something to do with what's going on down in Egypt, okay? Because it's an important part of the world for them. How about Aaron? Got another idea?
We've already talked about how Judea is a border between the Seleucids and Ptolemies, and Rome's going to move. They're moving into that area, so that's a crucial ally to have because they don't know at that point which way they're going to go next, but they know they're moving that way. So having any ally in that area is going to be an asset.
Okay, very good. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, at least until he's my enemy. Okay? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so if Judea whittles away at Seleucid power, that weakens the Seleucid Empire. That's good for me. And oh, by the way, if that makes the Jews really, really thankful for the Senate and people of Rome, then that's going to work in our favor down the road as well. Okay, so this is all geopolitics. We think we're the only people that ever come up with this idea of geopolitics. It's been around for a long time. People are doing this since, I don't know when, but a really long time. Okay, and they're doing it in this period as well. So, they're confirmed. The Seleucids know, well, we probably need to stay out of what's going on down there because Rome's not going to be very happy if we don't, and we're not in a position to take on Rome, okay? There are wars that are going on between the Seleucid Empire and Rome will eventually absorb all of this territory. But for now, the Seleucids want to exist. All right, so John Hyrcanus, now confirmed by this very powerful ally over there in the Mediterranean, goes about expanding his kingdom, doing some things to solidify his position. He has some successful military campaigns. One of those is against the city of Shechem. Shechem is conquered, and the temple on Mount Gerizim is destroyed. That takes place in about 129 BC. Okay? The Samaritans are these people that resulted from the mixing of Gentiles and Jews in this intertestamental period. We get to the New Testament period, they're the same people, okay? They're just the descendants mixed between Gentile and Jewish. So Hyrcanus is going to go up there. He's going to conquer the city of Shechem. And you've got a temple here. You can't have a temple here because the temple is where? It's in Jerusalem. This is a competing temple. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to destroy it. And that's what he does, okay? So in the New Testament period, is there a temple on Mount Gerizim? No, there is not. The Samaritans are worshiping there, but they're not worshiping in a temple. By the way, what God are the Samaritans worshiping in this period in the temple on Mount Gerizim? Yeah, Jehovah or Yahweh, okay? The Lord, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, okay? That's who they're worshiping, but in a competing temple, and John Hyrcanus is not going to have any of that. And so that temple gets destroyed. That's one military campaign. Another campaign takes place against Idumea. Idumea is the term that's used in this period for what was known in the Old Testament as ancient Edom. So Idumea is conquered. The inhabitants there are forced to accept circumcision. They're forced to convert to Judaism. Full conversion to Judaism always, without exception, meant circumcision. Okay? You were not a convert to Judaism if you were not circumcised, if you were male. Obviously not, we're not talking about women here. All right? So the Idumeans are forced to accept circumcision. They are forcibly converted to Judaism. Who are the Edomites? There's a question. I'm going to look for a hand here. And Tom's going to be ready to come to you with a microphone. Who are the Edomites? We're going to come right up here to Stacy. I know she's close and I could pick her up on the mic, but we got to follow the rules here, right?
Descendants of Esau.
They are the descendants of Esau. Good. Now don't leave Stacy because she opened the door here. So he was Esau.
Esau is the brother of Jacob.
Okay, very good. So Esau is the brother of Jacob, which means they have Isaac as their father. And the Edomites are descended from Esau. Thank you. That tells us that the Edomites are related to who? The Jews, the Israelites. Okay? And so when the Hasmoneans force these people to accept circumcision, they are the descendants of Abraham, but they're not the descendants of Jacob, okay? Okay. But they convert because they accept circumcision. All right, so Shechem is taken care of. Idumea is taken care of. Then in 107 BC, he attacks the Greek city of Samaria, which is completely conquered after a 1-year siege in 107 BC. All right, so we sometimes get Shechem and Samaria In our minds, we sometimes confuse the two. They are two distinct places. They are both in the territory of the Samaritans, but at this point in time in history, Samaria is not inhabited by Samaritans. That's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? They're Samaritan because they live in the city of Samaria. They are not Samaritan ethnically. They're Greeks. Okay? And so Hyrcanus takes care of that city and conquers them. John Hyrcanus then, after a fairly lengthy reign, dies in 104 BC. Just notice the dates there. We're getting really, really close to what period? The New Testament period. We're now almost within 100 years. Well, we are within 100 years of the birth of Jesus. You will remember that in the birth of Jesus lecture, Jesus was born in what year? Don't say 0. Yeah, about 4, 5, 6 BC, okay? So we're really within 100 years of the time of the birth of Jesus. So we're getting really, really close to New Testament history. All right, so this is a map to share with y'all. Hopefully y'all can see that. So this is, again, the territory. We've seen this map before. I might just point out here, Hyrcanus the First, that green shading there, that means the region of Samaria, some coastal territories as well, Idumea, as well as areas over here on the other side of the Dead Sea. So those are all territories that Hyrcanus the First adds to the lands conquered by the Maccabees and their descendants. Okay, so he adds a lot of territory. If you look at that, this is really what the Maccabees get a hold of, this area right here. John Hyrcanus basically doubles that territory, okay, during his reign. So he's a pretty significant Hasmonean ruler. All right, next map, or not map, next photo. This is probably a well-known photo. If you've had any Bible geography class over there that Aaron teaches, I bet you've seen a photo like this. It's a very distinct geographical feature. You have Gerizim over here, you have Ebal over here. Shechem is this town right there. Today, when you look at it, it's all over these slopes, okay? But that is the location of Shechem, Gerizim, and Ebal. Where is the temple? The Samaritan temple? On Gerizim, okay? That's where the temple is that Hyrcanus is going to destroy. Next photograph, this is the Mount Gerizim summit. I have no idea why that's cut off up there, but it's not cut off on mine, so I apologize for that. This is the summit on Mount Gerizim. These are the Samaritan temple steps. That's what's left of the Samaritan temple. Okay, so you would go up to the temple. It would have been built presumably up there on top. The steps are left in place. The temple is destroyed. If you go there today, I'm not sure who controls that area. It may be Palestinians, so you may not get to go there today. But if you went there today, you would be able to walk those steps up to the top where the temple had been. Okay? These are those same steps now viewed from the top looking down. If you are afraid of heights, that might make you a little queasy looking down the hill there, but those are the steps going back down. Okay? This would have been, you would have had a good view from the temple on top of this particular mountain, Mount Gerizim. All right, a quote. This is from Josephus. His book, Antiquities of the Jews. You get your reference there, 13, and the other numbers. That's just for finding it if you want to. Hyrcanus took also Dora and Marissa, cities of Idumea, and subdued all the Idumeans, and permitted them to stay in that country, if they would circumcise their genitals and make use of the laws of the Jews. And they were so desirous of living in the country of their forefathers that they submitted to the use of circumcision and the rest of the Jewish ways of living, at which time therefore this befell them, that they were hereafter no other than Jews. Okay? So, and Josephus, who is living and writing in the first century, says they accepted circumcision because the alternative is they've got to do what? They got to leave. Okay? I want to go back to a map here. I didn't point this out, and I probably should have. All right. Now, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, what is strange about that map? The Idumeans are who? They're the descendants of the Edomites. Think about your Old Testament maps. Think about that map.
It's on the east side during the time of the Israelites, because that's where Petra is.
You did not wait for the mic, but you had the correct answer. That is exactly right. The Edomites used to live over here. How'd they get over here? They were forced out. Okay, so now they've been forced out of where they had been, and probably had been there, well, not probably, they'd been there for centuries. They're forced out to this new country. Now Hyrcanus comes along and says, you want to stay here? You got to become Jews. Where else are you going to go? There's really nowhere else, okay? It's a lot like that Roman ambassador who draws a circle in the sand and says, you think about it. You make your decision before you leave the circle. What choice do we have? They really had none, okay? So they're going to accept circumcision. They're going to follow the laws. And it's interesting what Josephus says at the end of that quote, when I get back to it, that they were hereafter no other than Jews. They become Jews. They're not descended from Jacob. They're descended from Esau. So they're really cousins. But in accepting full-blown Judaism, they become Jews. So, a very famous Idumean, who we are still going to talk about in this class in a later lesson, is king of the Jews when Jesus is born. Who's that?
Herod.
Herod the Great, who was an Idumean. He's descended from Esau, not Jacob. And yet he's the king of the Jews because they become Jews for all intents and purposes. Okay? And his thinking is not completely Jewish, okay? Probably because he's a king, all right? And he's a worldly king. But as far as how anybody would look at them, they would have looked at them as completely as being Jews, okay? So that's Herod. All right, some photos to share with y'all. This is Marissa, just because I want you to see that these places actually do exist. Those are the ruins of Marissa. The tell of Marissa, you can see that right there, very telltale sign that it had been inhabited for a while. There's a joke there for archaeology. That's Marissa. The Judean hill country is off in the distance. Next photograph is of Marissa as well, the excavations. And then nothing to point out in that photo. Our next photo then is Samaria. Hopefully I got that up, Will, now. Samaria viewed from the north, okay? So you're north of Samaria, you're looking south toward Judea. It is up there on top of that hill. That is not a tell, okay? That's a hill on top of which had been built a city. Sometimes cities were built on hills, okay? That's not a tell, that's just a hill, all right? There might be a little bit of a tell on top of the hill, but the main thing you're seeing there in the photo would just be a hill. Okay, this is a photograph from Samaria as well. This is a Hellenistic tower and an Israelite wall. These towns are built and rebuilt over the centuries, so you have an Israelite wall here, but that particular tower dates to the Hellenistic period. So the city is expanding its fortifications. And you use fortifications that are still in good shape, you maybe repair them a little bit, and you build new ones. Kind of like walls at the lake house, right? You build new ones, you repair old ones, and you expand your fortifications to larger and better fortifications. That's just the way it works with cities. And so you get, in these excavations, in these remains, you get remains from different periods that are sometimes sitting right next to each other, in fact, both being used. So two different periods of fortifications that are in use there. Another photograph, this is zoomed in a little bit for the benefit of scale, when I pull that up. You've got the wall here, the Israelite wall. This is the Hellenistic tower over there. By the way, that fellow right there, as far as I know, is the guy that's responsible for all of these photos, or most of these photos. Okay? He lived over there for years and years and years in Israel and did a great job of really putting together a lot of photos. I would not have all these photos if it were not for that individual and the work that he did. All right, so that's John Hyrcanus. Let's go ahead and continue on. Our next ruler that we talk about is Aristobulus. Aristobulus is John Hyrcanus' oldest son in Hebrew, or say this differently. His Hebrew name is Judah, okay? So he's got two names. He's got a Greek name, Aristobulus, and he's got a Hebrew name, Judah. Sound familiar? We see that in the New Testament as well, okay? It was not uncommon in this period and stretching all the way into the New Testament. So Aristobulus comes along. He's going to be ruler after Hyrcanus. He cast 3 of his brothers into prison where 2 starved to death. Probably gives you an idea what this guy was like, right? He doesn't execute them. He doesn't have them beheaded, but he throws them in prison, 3 of them. 2 of them are there so long without food, they die of starvation. Takes a little while to die of starvation, okay? That's what he does to 2 of his brothers. I suspected he wanted to kill the 3rd one too. I don't know why he didn't die, but 2 of them at least die. Another brother, not the one in the prison, is murdered in the palace. So if you're the new king, you don't want any rivals, what do? You get rid of them, okay? This particular one is murdered. I'm not sure why he gets murdered and the others get thrown into jail until they starve to death, but kind of gives you an idea what Aristobulus was like. Not a nice guy, okay? He pushes the kingdom's borders north to around Mount Lebanon. So he expands northward, the kingdom. He dies, by the way, he manages to accomplish this after ruling for only 1 year. And there was little mourning on the part of the people for him. So he reigns for a year. He succeeds in killing 4 of his brothers, or well, to leave it at what we know, or what I know at any rate, 3 of his brothers. Another one presumably escapes, doesn't die. He expands his kingdom, and then he dies. He does that in 1 year. And the Jews are not sorry to see this guy go. Okay? They didn't like him. They didn't like what he was doing. When he dies, okay, next king. And indeed, did we have a question? No. And indeed, our next king is going to be a fellow whose name was Alexander Jannaeus. He had been imprisoned, there we go, he had been imprisoned by his brother Aristobulus. That's the 3rd brother, I guess the one that didn't starve to death. His Hebrew name was Jonathan. He ends up reigning from 103 to 76. Remember, Aristobulus reigns a year. He becomes king and he reigns 103 to 76. So that's 27 years. Okay, if my math is right, he reigns a long time. 27 years as opposed to 1. He continues the territorial expansion of his kingdom, and the borders under his reign almost reach the extent of David's and Solomon's kingdoms, okay, which is pretty impressive. However, he had little regard for those who zealously believed in keeping the law. Oh, you really think we ought to keep the Jewish law? You really think we ought to keep the law of God? Well, okay, whatever. I'm not all that interested in doing that. And he doesn't. Okay, civil war breaks out during his reign, but Alexander manages to remain on the throne. Okay, so next page or next slide. This is a coin. This particular coin is a coin that Alexander Jannaeus had minted. It has a ship's anchor on it, and if you were looking for that ship's anchor, it is right there. Okay, that is a ship's anchor. Looks kind of like an anchor. Looks a little bit different than what we think of as an anchor, but that's what it looked like at the time. The Greek inscription there says King Alexander. That's Alexander Jannaeus. On the reverse side, we have, it's either a wheel or a star. Experts are not certain. And in Hebrew, it says Jonathan the King. So he's got Greek on one side, his name in Greek on one side, and he's got Hebrew on the other. He goes by both names. Why do you make a coin like that? Why would you make a coin like that if you're a king?
Politically for all people, it matches what everybody claims to be.
That's exactly right. It's politically good because you cover all your bases here. You've got the folks that are committed Hellenists. You got the folks that are committed Hebrews. I'm going to make sure my coin is acceptable to everybody. And so I'm going to have both on there. What I would point out about this period is the Maccabees lead a rebellion against Antiochus IV because he is suppressing Jewish law. But what ends up happening is the Jews end up solidly breaking into 2 camps. Those who are committed to following the Jewish law, and those who have compromised with Hellenism. Okay? And this is going to continue for a very long time. You will see vestiges of this even in the New Testament. Not even vestiges. You'll see this in the New Testament as well. So you've got folks among the Jews, and I'm pretty sure we have a class on the Jewish sects in this class. You got the Sadducees. You got the Pharisees. You got the Herodians. And you got the Zealots. You think about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Who was really interested in following the law of Moses? Pharisees were. What about the Sadducees? What were they all about?
They had power, money, and they were homeless.
They had power, they had money, and they were Hellenists, okay? So they denied the existence of the Spirit. They denied the resurrection. They denied angels and demons, okay? Kind of an interesting concept for people that are supposed to be following the Old Testament law, don't you think? That's a result of this Hellenism, this tension between people following the law of Moses and people following Greek culture. Let's fast forward to 2025. We got to get used to saying that, don't we? 2025? This is never an issue for God's people, is it? Well, I will grant, none of us want to be Greek in our culture, right? Unless you're going to a Greek restaurant, you like Greek food, you might want to be Greek that night. But do we not, as Christians, have a tension between what the world thinks and what Christ thinks? And do we find ourselves pulled between those two things? I do. I suspect you do as well. All right? So that overall problem hasn't changed. In the New Testament, it's called don't be unequally yoked. Don't compromise with the world. Come out from the world. Okay? It's the same concept. This has been going on for a long time among the Jews. Okay? By the way, why the anchor? You might have an idea? Why would there be an anchor on a Jewish coin? Well, it's because Alexander and several of the Hasmoneans from this dynasty were interested in Judea becoming a maritime power. It's not a maritime power. Well, it was not a maritime power historically. Okay? Nobody was afraid of the Israeli Navy in the Old Testament because most of the time Israel didn't have a navy. There were some times when they tried to have a navy and it didn't work out very well. These guys wanted to see Israel have a navy. They wanted to have a maritime power because maritime power, not because you're trying to establish a world empire, but if you've got a navy, you've got trade, and trade brings in what? Money. Okay? They won't succeed either. Okay? The problem with Israel is it's got really, really bad.
Coastline isn't really adapted to having ships come.
It doesn't have good ports and harbors. Okay? By the way, there's a fellow who's going to do something about that. Anybody happen to know who that fellow might be? Herod the Great. He'll build Israel a port. And it was a big port. I think we'll see some pictures of that when we talk about Herod. All right, so that's what the anchor is all about. All right, let's continue on. Our next ruler that we talk about is a woman this time. Her name is Salome Alexandra. She had been married successively to Aristobulus and Alexander Jannaeus. Okay? She was 70 years old at the beginning of her reign, and she reigns from 76 to 67. Now, we look at that age, 70 years old, and we say, well, what's special about that, right? In America today, the average life expectancy is, I don't know, like 75, 76. So people who are 76 years old, that's just normal, right? I'm not asking for a show of hands tonight, but I know several of y'all are in your 70s and beyond. In the ancient world, people living to be 70 years old was fairly unusual. The life expectancy in the ancient world was somewhere in the 40s. Less for women. Women today have a longer life expectancy than men here. In the ancient world, they had a shorter. Anybody have a gander, think of an idea why that would be?
Childbirth.
Childbirth, okay? It's still the most dangerous time in a woman's life, being pregnant, all right? So women didn't tend to live as long as men did, so she starts reigning when she's 70, and she's going to reign for a while. She ends up reigning for another 9 years. So she's how old when she dies? Almost 80. Pretty interesting, pretty significant. All right, she had an older son. Her older son's name was Hyrcanus. That's another Hyrcanus, not the one we talked about earlier. He officiates as high priest, okay? She had a younger son whose name was Aristobulus, not the Aristobulus we already talked about. He becomes the military commander. So she's queen. One son's going to be the high priest. The other son is going to be the military commander. She has got things firmly, at least in her mind, firmly under her control. Well, she dies in 67. Remember, we're counting down. All right, we're getting close now to the time of Jesus. She's replaced, well, she's not replaced. She dies. So the next king, Ruler is going to be Hyrcanus II. He is the older son of Salome Alexandra. He reigns for 3 months after the death of his mother. Not being content with that situation, Aristobulus, who is his brother, leads a revolt, and Hyrcanus ends up surrendering. Okay, so he only reigns 3 months. He doesn't die, okay, but he doesn't get to be ruler anymore, leader of the people. He has to resign his offices because at this point in time, he was already high priest. You don't give that up. Now he's king. So he's king and high priest. And Aristobulus says, no, you can't be either one. So you're going to have to give up both. But he gets to keep his life. That's important. He gets to keep his property as well. All right. So at least Aristobulus is nice to this brother. There's a lot of not so nice behavior between brothers in these dynasties. Okay. So he's going to have to step down. And he does. That means that now Aristobulus II is going to reign. Antipater, there's a new name for us. Antipater the Idumean. What are they religiously? Jews, but he's from Idumea. Okay? Antipater the Idumean convinces Hyrcanus that he is in danger of being killed. Brother has already said, step down, you get to live, you get to keep your property, keep the house you're living in, whatever your lands, okay? But Antipater steps in and says, you know, Hyrcanus, you really ought to think about this. You're in danger and you should run away. So Hyrcanus flees to another area where there's a king whose name is Aretas, and he's in Nabatea. Nabatea has a capital, and we all know this. We all know the place because Indiana Jones was filmed there, okay, called Petra. And so Nabateans, their capital was called Petra. It's in Jordan today. So if you want to go see Petra, you're going to have to cross an international border from Israel into Jordan, or you fly straight into Jordan, I guess, and you can go see Petra today. Who's been here to Petra? All right, so 1, 2 of y'all. Y'all didn't make it to Petra. Okay, so a couple of y'all have made it to Petra. I haven't been there, but I can see from the pictures that it's probably pretty impressive. Stacy says yes. Okay. So Hyrcanus flees to Nabatea. Aretas then marches against Judea. This is in 65 BC. Besieges Aristobulus in Jerusalem. So Hyrcanus goes to the Nabateans, and the Nabateans say, this might be a good time to expand our territory. So they're going to go against Judea. In 64 BC, a Roman army shows up in Syria led by a fellow whose name was Scotus. Scotus is Pompey the Great's military tribune. He's in Syria. He's got an army. Okay, the Romans are expanding their territory. Hyrcanus and Aristobulus both attempt to win Roman support. Okay, this big army to the north, if we're going to have any chance at all of remaining or even gaining the throne, whichever the case may be, we're going to have to get the Romans on board with us. So that's what they're going to try to do. All right. So the Romans talk to both parties and decide that one of them has got a juster case, right? A more just case. That sound reasonable for the Romans? Nah, of course not. What ends up happening is Scaurus accepts Aristobulus' larger bribe. Aristobulus had more money. So he gives the money to Scaurus, who says, okay, I'm on your side now because you gave a lot of money. Aretas is ordered to not life, but lift the siege of Jerusalem and withdraw. So once again, Jerusalem finds itself, at least momentarily, under the protection of who? The Romans. Okay. However, in 63 BC, Pompey the Great decides to shift support from Aristobulus to Hyrcanus. So we're not going to support one, we're going to support the other one. Aristobulus is now besieged in Jerusalem, which falls after 3 months. Hyrcanus then continues as high priest and is given the title ethnarch, ruler of the people. But significantly, that is not the title king. Okay? That is effectively the end of the Hasmonean dynasty. At this point in time, who's deciding who's going to rule over the Jews? The Romans are. Okay. Ethnarch is a title, by the way, that you will see in the New Testament. It is used elsewhere. It was not an uncommon title. It means ruler of the people, and again, it was short of being a king. If you were a ruler, what title did you want? You wanted to be king. Okay. Basileus in Greek. Ethnarch, that's short of the real power that I want. But if the Romans want to keep you in your place, what do they deny you? They deny you the title king. Okay, they give you some other title that lowers your power, and that's what they do here for Aristobulus, or I'm sorry, for Hyrcanus. Okay, all right. So some quotes. This is a lengthy one. It'll be on 2 slides, so we'll read the one and then we'll skip to the next one. Of the Jews, there fell 12,000, but of the Romans, very few. Absalom, who was at once both uncle and father-in-law to Aristobulus, was taken captive, and no small enormities were committed about the temple itself, which in former ages had been inaccessible and seen by none. For Pompey went into it, and not a few of those that were with him also, and saw all that which it was unlawful for any other men to see, but only for the high priests. There were in the temple the golden table, the holy candlestick, and the pouring vessels, and a great quantity of spices. And besides these, there were among the treasures 2,000 talents of sacred money. Yet did Pompey touch nothing of all this on account of his regard to religion. And at this point also, he acted in a manner that was worthy of his virtue. The next day, he gave order to those that had the charge of the temple to cleanse it, and to bring what offerings the law required to God, and restored the high priesthood to Hyrcanus, both because he had been useful to him in other respects, and because he hindered the Jews in the country from giving Aristobulus any assistance in his war against him. Now Pompey committed Celesyria as far as the river Euphrates in Egypt to scour us with 2 Roman legions, and then went away to Cilicia. Cilicia is where? Asia Minor, modern Turkey. Okay, so to the north, and made haste to Rome. He also carried bound along with him Aristobulus and his children, for he had 2 daughters and as many sons, the one of whom ran away, but the younger Antigonus was carried to Rome together with his sisters. Why do these folks get hauled off to Rome? Can't lead a rebellion from Rome. So we're going to take you off there, and we'll take your kids with you because, you know, people are just not as willing to rebel if their children might die. Okay? All right. Some photographs. These are the mountains near, well, pull them up here. How about that? These are the mountains near Petra. Okay, it's very rocky. At least that part of it's very rocky. This is Petra itself viewed from above. As soon as I pull that up, there we go. Petra viewed from above. Petra is interesting in that how it's built. You kind of see this in the Indiana Jones movie. That you have to go. Like, what does he go on, a camel? I guess, or camel or donkey, gets there on a horse, maybe, whatever. You go through this entryway to get there because it's in this valley that's pretty much from every direction sealed off except for one, and so that makes it pretty easily defensible. That's why the Nabateans chose it as their capital and their stronghold. And you can kind of tell that a little bit from there. You see those rocky mountains. I'm pointing back there, but you're looking up here. All these rocky mountains around, and the ruins are down here, down in the center. Okay, the one we're familiar with, I think, is called the library. Treasury. Thank you, the treasury. That's the Last Crusade. That's the third of the Indiana Jones. See, I say the third because everything after that one is, I don't know what that is. The third movie, okay, where they're drinking from the chalice and all of that, that takes place in the treasury in Petra.
That entry is called Sick Gorge.
Okay.
And at some points, there's enough room for 4 people at rest to stand, but in some places, only 2 people.
Okay, so Stacy said the entryway is in some places wide enough for 4 people side by side, but in some places only 2. So it's really hard to get an army in there. Okay, all right. So next photograph, this is Petra. This is the Great Temple. That's, we think of the treasury because, well, it was in Indiana Jones, right? But there are other ruins there as well. This is what is called the Great Temple. And then that's another temple there in Petra. Share with you another couple of photos. We have one more slide. This is a bust of Pompey the Great. Again, people were very realistic during this time period. All of these marble busts and statues today are white. They were originally painted. Okay, the Romans painted their statues. They liked color just like everybody else. Okay, and then over there in the next photograph, we get a reconstruction of what Pompey supposedly looked like. Pompey is not a Roman emperor. Roman Empire hasn't been established yet. Okay, but he is reigning de facto as an emperor, even though he's not an emperor. Okay, all right. So that gets us to our last slide, and that's about Antipater. Antipater, again, is an Idumean or an Edomite by birth. Jewish by virtue of the forced conversion carried out by Hyrcanus I, that Hasmonean. He served as a governor of Idumea under Alexander Jannaeus, Salome Alexandra. He interfered in the struggle between Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. He eventually, now this is a name you're going to know, he eventually becomes Julius Caesar's ally. Oh, now we know this guy. He was the first emperor, right? No, he was not. Okay, Julius Caesar, even though he has that title Caesar, which is emperor, was not emperor. Okay, another one of those quirks of history. Julius Caesar was not Caesar. Okay, he was not the emperor. But Antipater is really good friends with this fella, Julius Caesar. And Antipater has a son, and his name was Herod, later Herod the Great. So if you're following the timeline of history here, you're beginning to realize that now we're getting into things that are very much New Testament. But we're not there yet, because Sunday morning, we're going to go backwards in time. Sunday morning and next Wednesday night, we're going to talk about Daniel's prophecies of the period, because we got to do that before we continue on with the Romans. All right? So there'll be handouts Sunday morning in the basket. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to spend 2 classes on that. We do not have the luxury of falling behind. And that means you will probably be somewhat disappointed by how quickly we cover them, but we have no choice. Okay? So we are going to move right through those and cover as best we can. You will have questions that I will not know the answers to. That's okay. I know that going into it. I tell you that going into it. So hopefully at least you won't be disappointed. All right. Thank you all very much.